To Crosstalk Legacies in the Middle East, I'm joined by my guest, Joshua Landison-Norman. He is the director of the Center of Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. In New York, we have Andy Martin. He is an independent foreign policy and intelligence analyst. And in London, we cross to Charlie Wolf. He is a writer, broadcaster, and political commentator. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Joshua, I'm going to go to you first in Norman, Oklahoma. You know, it was 95 years ago the maps were drawn. What's the legacy, the most important legacy in your mind 95 years later?
Well, I think that we are seeing the birth of nations in the Middle East, and dictators like Saddam Hussein, Assad, are little bits of the Ottoman Empire, and they've kept this multi-ethnic, multi-religious parts of the Ottoman Empire together by oppression, largely. Now, in this age of popular movements, we are seeing them challenged, and we're getting the breakup, I think, and rearrangement of ethnic power. And in Iraq, we've had the Shiites come to the top, the Sunnis cast down. In Lebanon, something similar is going on with the Christians losing power, Muslims coming up. And in Syria, the Alawites, small minority, 12%, are challenged. This is much like the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Eastern Europe after the First World War. The map there was completely rearranged. Yugoslavia, 7 countries. Czechoslovakia split in 2. Polish borders changed. In the 2 years after Second World War, 1945 to 47, about 12 million Germans were ethnically cleansed from countries from Poland right down to Ukraine and so forth. So we see massive rearrangement of peoples in order to organize them in national entities.
Josh, I
in these
disagree with you
multi-ethnic,
completely.
multi-religious lands. And I think something similar is going on.
Okay. The crosstalk has already started. Andy, go ahead. Andy, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah. I completely disagree with you. My earpiece fell out.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, we got you.
You see, you're not giving adequate attention to the impact of the United Nations. And I think the best example of the counter-argument is what happened in Kuwait in 1990 when Saddam Hussein did try to rearrange the border with Saudi Arabia and eliminate Kuwait. And President Bush was able to assemble a worldwide coalition because forcible border changes don't work anymore. And we're not going to have ethnic cleansing of millions of people. And at the end of the day, when all this upheaval is over, I seriously doubt that any national borders will change. The only place where I perceive some instability,
it looks like a lot of these countries are already challenged. Andy, if I could stay with you, a lot of these countries are challenged in terms of sovereignty, and we can talk about every single one of them. We don't have a lot of time, but Libya comes to mind, Iraq comes to mind. Charlie, let's go to you, my third guest on the program here, Charlie in London. The legacy here is that we see these lines, these borders were drawn by Westerners, and we're seeing today that those lines are not appropriate to what's happening on the ground, and we can talk about civil society, social movements, and democracy. Go ahead, Charlie in London.
Well, I think I need to concur with the last person to speak. Forgive me, I lost track there.
Okay, Andy.
But who is going to do it? We don't, with Andy, I don't see the United States is maybe the only one physically capable, but I don't see them in the position of wanting to do it, especially under the current administration. And I think even a future, dare I say, Republican administration probably wouldn't be interested either. My older, wiser, more sagacious brother has a saying that it's carried me through life, which is, it is what it is. Was it right to set up these boundaries back
let me give you an example, Charlie, that proves the point.
Rightly or wrongly, it happened, and it's there.
Okay, Joshua, if I can go to you, I'm glad we have a lot of discussion here. But Joshua, I mean, this sounds very Orientalist to me. I mean, these borders are artificial. They don't reflect what's going down in the ground. Go ahead, Joshua. Jump in.
It's not so much the borders. There are borders. Of course, Kurdistan and the Kurdish regions, I think, are developing to an independent nation. But this is the power of nationalism. We've seen Anatolia, Turkey, today, was 20% Christian, 1914, 18%. By 1922, after the Turkish Revolution, less than 1% Christian. Iraq, half of the Christians have been ethnically cleansed, the Sabians, other minority groups. And the people have been rearranged, Kurds, Shiites. Palestine Palestinians largely moved out of Palestine as Jews became a majority, went from being a minority to a majority. And the Palestinians are still losing every day. There's rearrangement. And the borders, of course, are changing too. And I don't think there's going to be a two-state solution. Yeah. There will probably be a one-state solution of some kind. And Lebanon, we've seen the Christians lose out.
I still disagree with you.
Christians are leaving the Middle East.
Okay. Andy, jump in New York.
This is
go
rearranging.
Go ahead, Andy.
Populations.
Andy, go ahead.
First of all, Kurdistan is a place where there is sort of a potential nation when you take parts of Syria and Turkey and Iraq. But there is absolutely no prospect of the United Nations or the world community recognizing a nation there. And if the Kurds, who are doing rather well as a part of this old empire construct, were to declare their independence from Iraq, they would find zero recognition from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from France, from the European Union. So we're dealing with a very different world. And of course, the Israelis also disprove your point. The Israelis would love to annex the West Bank and create what they call Eretz Israel, but they are prevented from doing so by the knowledge that that would probably ostracize the Israeli regime. So changing borders by force or annexation, I don't think is an option, I think the United Nations
What's really interesting here,
willing
gentlemen, is
we
have two. We're looking at it in two different ways. We're looking at international law and the United Nations, which is all nice and fine. But Charlie, facts on the ground are very different. Okay, the Kurds are not going to listen to that. If they have a chance for their nation state, they're going to go for it. Iraq is being broken up into 3 different countries. Libya is falling apart as well. It doesn't matter if the international community recognizes this separation. They're happening on the ground as we speak. Go ahead, Charlie.
Oh, yes. Right. And I think also facts on the ground also are there from historic reasons. For instance, Israel actually was supposed to be far larger than it is. Transjordan was part of Mandate Israel. Again, that's not how it turned out. I don't think the Eretz Yisrael argument holds as much water as people say. I think the Israelis are only interested essentially in their security. You know, I'm sure there are some that would love to expand out to what was once supposed to be theirs, but again, it is what it is, and Israel is what Israel is. I think they're more worried about what's happening on their borders. Syria is more of a concern, and I think
what's
also
very interesting is that we talk about, you know, recognition of states under the United Nations, but then a country like Israel doesn't have to follow international law. That's hypocrisy. That's an exception. I don't want to make this whole program on Israel. I want to talk about the legacy of the Ottoman Empire. Go ahead, Joshua.
Libya is, you know, we don't know how Libya, whether it will remain unified or whether Cyrenaica and Tripoli will divide. Syria, the move towards peace talks on Syria between the Assad government and rebel-held regions could lead to a partition of Syria. One of the reasons that the rebels do not want to go to Geneva II today is because that would be the likely outcome, is them recognizing that Assad is in half the country. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Syria divides in two forever, but it does lead to it does lead to some sort of partition. And there are religious lines along which that gets partitioned, in the sense that the Alawites are maintaining power in the south and rebels, Islamists in the north. And the ISIS, Al-Qaeda, wants to unify Iraq and the Sunni parts of Iraq with Sunni parts with Syria. And so there are a lot of forces on the ground, and you know, America may not step in and prevent this sort of thing if it moves forward. So we don't know how this is going to turn out in the end.
Okay, Andy, jump in, because
Peter, can I just
Go ahead, Charlie. This is Crosstalk. Jump in. Charlie asked to jump in. Go ahead, Charlie. Go ahead. Go ahead, Charlie.
I think that Libya is an unknown, but as far as Syria is concerned, one has to also look at Russia's involvement in all of this. It behooves Russia for Syria to stay how it is. That's essentially their only real interest right now in the Middle East. I think the Russians would like to see Assad staying in power, and I think they'd like to see the status quo.
We've gone over this ground before, Charlie. We've gone over this ground before. Russia's primary interest is to see Syria stay together as a sovereign state, because if Syria falls and Al-Qaeda takes over, it's a 20-hour drive to southern Russia. That's Russia's foreign policy, fundamental interest, and recognizing international law. We've been through this before. Andy, you want to jump in before we go to the break?
Well, yes, I think you misunderstood what Charlie said, because he said the same thing, that the Russians have an interest in a unified Syria. And you see, once you start breaking it up, you don't know what you'll end up with. You know, Joe Biden wanted to divide Iraq into 3 parts, and that was ridiculed then and now. I was an opponent of the Iraq invasion, but nevertheless spent a lot. Yes, I spent a lot of time in Iraq in 2003 living there, and I saw the facts on the ground. But you're negating the issue of politics and power. However odious the Maliki regime may be, it does control the borders. It does have the attributes of a nation state. And I think the Kurds are rather shrewd in that they are profiting from the weakness of the Iraqi government, but at the same time they don't want to take on the opprobrium of the organized world by unilaterally declaring independence. The last place to declare independence unilaterally, I think, was Rhodesia, and that got them nowhere. They ended up losing everything. So what we have here is that politics tends to be a binding influence and a binding force.
All right, gentlemen, I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the making of the modern Middle East. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the origins of the modern Middle East. Okay, Joshua, I'd like to go back to you in Norman, Oklahoma. The Western powers drew these borders in the Middle East as we know it today. They came up with a plan before the end of the war, and it was put into place after the war. How much can the Western powers, and particularly the United States in this case, control political change on the ground? I mean, we created this world when it comes to borders and move people on this side of the line, on that side of the line. We can have disagreements on this program, but it seems to me untenable. People are going to want to live among themselves. We have dictators that are taking cues from other countries, particularly the Western countries, as we saw in North Africa and all through the Arab Middle East. It's just not working anymore. So can they continue to do it, or is there a new strategy?
Well, I think you're right, and this has big policy implications. There are 2 different issues. One is changing borders, and I agree with the other 2 guests that it's hard to change borders in this day and age, not impossible. But it's more importantly is the identity of the nation states. The colonial powers drew circles around geographic, regions, and they trapped people together who did not want to live together or found it difficult to live together. We've seen this in Lebanon, Iraq, Palestine, and Syria. And multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and they've been in civil war rearranging the power. And that has led to ethnic cleansing and changing in balance of power, who's on top, who's on bottom. And that is a very dynamic process. We've seen it in Eastern Europe, cost of millions of people. We're seeing it today. And it means the policy implications are the United States or any major power cannot adjudicate these deep issues of national identity. In Iraq, we put the Shiites on top, Sunnis on the bottom, and it's still a civil war today. The Sunnis have been marginalized, and they're fighting tooth and nail, joining al-Qaeda. In Syria, Alawites have been on top for 50 years, and now the Sunnis want to get on top. And America is trying to adjudicate, but it will not be able to solve the deep-set sectarian questions. Same in Lebanon, where you have a balance of power between different religious groups.
I don't think America is trying to adjudicate anything in Syria.
Okay, go ahead, Andy. Go ahead.
Well, they aren't. They did try to do it. They failed in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they learned their lesson.
Go ahead, Andy in New York. Go ahead.
Yeah. What Barack Obama has been criticized by the right wing for, and I think unfairly, is he's not doing anything in Syria. And his view has been the situation is not clear enough for us to have a national interest in this, what is essentially a civil war. But coming back to Libya, on the one side of Libya you have Algeria, and on the other side you have Egypt. Neither of those countries is going to attempt to absorb Libya. So the nation state of Libya will continue in its form. There will be fighting internally among the various tribes and factions, but none of those factions is sufficiently strong to create a nation state in place of the existing